Hi, folks. Dalton Mortimer, the Authenticator here, and okay. First of all, obligatory, necessary joke because, of course, um, yes, the new visual effects demo for Hollywood is out. I can't wait for these effects to be used with anything resembling a modicum of creativity or imagination. But in earnest, okay. So yes, Avatar, Fire and Ash, or yeah, Avatar, Ire and Ass is basically the long and the short of it. But yes, the third Avatar, James, I should specify the third James Cameron's Avatar movie is out because, and this gives something of the game away in that you usually have to put the phrase James Cameron's in front of the blue people, the blue cat furry avatar, lest people think you're talking about Aang and Katara and Sokka and Zuko and company. Um, that in and of itself should be rather telling, and it's been rather telling for decades now, but everyone knows already. So moving swiftly onward. Okay, beginning actually with the actual review now. I'm gonna have to open in a surprising place because, and you're gonna look at me like I've grown a second head when I say this, but this is my favorite of the three. Or I guess I should say, this is, in my opinion, the best of the three because none of them can be said to be my favorite. Um, and okay, I guess we before I get into elaborating how the fuck any of that works, I will add uh sort of background on where in the fuck I stand on the whole James Cameron's Avatar issue. The spell has never worked on me. Like, okay, part of it is that I didn't watch Avatar until it left the theater on Netflix back when it was on Netflix. And I fell asleep watching it 3 times in a row before I was able to finish the first fucking thing. And mind you, I am not someone who ever falls asleep during movies. Even really, really, really unspeakably bad or boring movies, I can at least maintain being awake until the end. But but Avatar is the one movie that just it's like the cinematic equivalent of Valium. The first Avatar goes on, and within 20 minutes, I am asleep. If I am not very, very, very conscious of resisting the urge to fall the fuck asleep. Um, and so you may conclude from that I'm not particularly the most fair human being on the James Cameron's Avatar franchise. And to an extent, I will concede that I might not be the most fair person in the universe when it comes to James Cameron's Avatar. But I'm going to allow myself a little bit of Schadenfreude indulgence here because these things make two bastarding $1 billion minimum apiece, and so apparently I and well, that's that's the other elephant or Pandoran fucking Oliphant in the room. Um, is that I'm not actually in the minority when it comes to that feeling of Avatar of it bores me to the point of rage, and it's not even a bad enough movie that I can get some kind of so bad it's good enjoyment out of it. And when you hear anything about James Cameron's Avatar franchise that isn't they make two bastarding $1 billion minimum apiece, it is always that. It is always that the movie is basically the cinematic equivalent of Valium, as I said earlier. Um, and there's next to no cultural impact on it, which is true, but not the point. So we will circle back to the more lack of cultural footprint thing as and when I can spiral back to it in my ranting and raging because I I I despise everything about this franchise, and it does not. And just to be clear, I am someone who can be won over when things do better or do something better than I was expecting them to do. As I opened my piece with here, this is my favorite of the three, and I guess we should stop beating around the fucking sacred Awa in bush here and actually get back to that rather counterintuitive piece of opening salvo here. Yes, this is my favorite of the three. And it is my favorite of the three specifically because there are brief moments in Avatar Fire and Ash where something happens or some idea is floated that makes my pulse go above the teens. And that is not something I can meaningfully say with either of the first two. As I said, the first Avatar is fucking cinematic ambient or cinematic Valium, and the second Avatar is just, oh god, insufferable. But that's neither here nor there. I already did a review of um Way of Water on another channel when I was doing my top 10 um my top 10 worst movies of 2022 over on the movie channel I share with Englentine from I Love Comics, which I believe is still called I Love Movies, but it might have changed its name several times by now. But anyway, so I did a review of James Cameron's Avatar: The Way of Water, and my opinion has not meaningfully changed on that movie. It is still, to borrow my phrasing, like someone took all of the artistic tools at their disposal and a blank canvas and chose to do nothing more elaborate or complex or profound or conceptual or spiritual than painting a very, very, very elaborately photorealistic bowl of fruit. But that's neither here nor there. The reason why this movie manages to occasionally arouse me beyond coma is that for the briefest of moments, it flirts with ideas that I actually might conceive of getting invested in. Namely, the like the spiritual angle and this whole business with Awa. Um, Unfortunately, or actually no. Let me go into more detail on the elements of the story that are worth pursuing. And yes, this entire video shall contain spoilers. And no, I am not apologizing, but you have been warned. Okay, so three things worth pursuing here that actually made me think, oh gee, are we finally going to knock off the foreplay and actually get to the allegedly visually interesting or conceptually interesting portions of the program? Firstly, the Ash people themselves and their estranged relationship with Awa. This kind of anti-theistic, not in the atheistic sense of you think religion is harmful for humanity, but in the sense of you know that there definitively are gods and that they hate you, so fuck them. Um, that aspect, that like scorned, embittered aspect of the Ash people is interesting, especially because if anyone remembers the first Avatar, which, again, I admit, these movies are basically psychic blanks, so you will be forgiven for not remembering if you have not remembered. But they established in that first movie, or at least they heavily alluded to, the fact that Awa is a very like sci-fi oriented type of deity. Like she's not Thor or like she's not like Dormammu or any of the like spiritual entities within the Marvel universe, the MCU canon. She's not like um she's not like a act. Well, no, she is an actual deity, but the thing. Okay, so I'm rambling again. Sorry. This franchise, man. This franchise, it it makes you dumber to even talk about it. I swear to fucking animistic Gaia knockoff. Um, but they established in the first movie that there is a sci-fi element to the quasi-deification of Awa. She's not a deity in the like spiritual, like literal Gaian sense. She's sort of, or again, loosely implied because this franchise does not go into detail on fucking anything. Um, it's loosely implied that Awa is essentially a superorganism that's a little bit like if the brain bug from Starship Troopers had a baby with Starro the Conqueror, and then that creature had a baby with Ego the Living Planet from Guardians of the Galaxy 2. Which is fine. I personally would prefer if we went more straight up spiritual, like I always say. I'm the biggest advocate against Arthur C. Clarke's alleged laws, and I am the biggest advocate against the like Eric von Dänikinian ancient alien bullshit. That being said, though, the idea that Awa is this hyper intelligent superorganism and is Gaian only in the sense that she has a kind of venom like symbiosis with everything on the planet, which is why every like meaningful creature on Pandora has a biomechanical USB or Ethernet cable and a biomechanical Ethernet port on it. It's why the Na'vi have the plugs and the space whales have the plugs and the reefs and spirit trees have the plugs and so on. And it was even loosely implied, again, because this franchise does not expand on fucking anything it establishes, that part of what made Awa able to interact at points of connection or points of hub like the spirit trees or the spirit reefs is because of unobtainium, which again, for those that don't remember, because this franchise is a psychic blank, the unobtainium is allegedly, supposedly important because it is essentially the ideal, like, sci-fi quantum computer slash superconductor MacGuffin. Um, and so that sort of hyper quantum connectivity is what enables points like the spirit trees and the spirit reefs to be of significance to fucking anything. And enables them to be points at which Awa can more explicitly interact with her people. And yes, this does kind of tie into that meme from 4chan, the spare us your pity alien meme, the Quaritch speech that Quaritch should have definitely had something equivalent to in the movies, but didn't because the fans of this franchise, the few that there are, know how to write this franchise better than the people who created and run said franchise. Okay, so bearing this in mind, bearing in mind that Awa is this, again, if Star the Conqueror and the Brain Bug from Starship Troopers had a baby, and then that baby had a baby with Ego the Living Planet from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Bearing in mind that she's this sci-fi superorganism rather than a more traditional deity, the idea of a Na'vi tribe that gets shortchanged by Awa and comes to the conclusion that Awa is essentially parasitizing off of all the life on Pandora that she created, and that the Na'vi that follow her are basically glorified puppets. Again, calling back to something resembling the sentiments of that one Sparish or Pity alien meme from 4chan. And also the stuff that Arch from the Archcast alluded to, and yes, I have seen that as well. And I don't know if I would go quite as bleak as Arch does, or quite as the human beings are the only based ones, or that the Na'vi are evil slash puppets to a ludicrous degree, because of Awa. But I get the point that he's trying to make, even if I don't go quite as far with it as he does, and I do agree with the base of the point, just not the full extent of it. But anyway, so the idea that um this Navi tribe lost their connection to Awa, and that they begged and pleaded and prayed for Awa to help them, and Awa did nothing. And therefore they go, again, not atheist type of anti-theism, but we know the gods exist and fuck them kind of anti-theism, um, makes sense and is an interesting idea. Another interesting idea here is that through the course of the movie, Spider loses one of his oxygen masks because he didn't bring the charger with him. Which is stupid, yes, but it's explicably stupid, as in it is a thing in universe that I can see could have happened without necessarily assuming that every character is an idiot. And so, Spider is fucking, dying and hyperventilating because you can't breathe the air on Pandora without Awa's blessing, because Awa also controls like the microorganism aspects of this universe, because again, hyper intelligent organism essentially passing as a posing as a deity. And so Spider is dying, and then Sigourney Weaver's character Kiri, who I through the course of this movie started just mentally referring to in my head as shamanic Jean Grey Messiah Smurf, because literally, like, to the letter, they set up in Way of Water that she was essentially the, like, embodiment of Awa. She is to Awa what the other JC is to his daddy dearest in, the Abrahamic space. Uh, and that's fine, but they literally set it up precisely the same way that they set up Jean Grey having the Phoenix Force again in X-Men Age of Apocalypse. So again, I just started referring to her as shamanic Jean Grey Messiah Smurf. And anyway, so shamanic Jean Grey Messiah Smurf, as I've taken to calling her, she uses her connection with Awa to save Spider's life by biomechanically grafting onto him, or like bioengineeringly grafting onto him the plug and the breathing apparatus that the creatures of Pandora have. But here's the thing: another interesting aspect of this, because there are actually two interesting aspects of this that relate to both what Kiri's role in this and Spider's role in this. One is that Kiri appears to kind of use her status as the, like, avatar of Awa, which, yes, I'm sure the movie is playing on both meanings of an avatar. Avatar in the sense of, like, a video gaming avatar, which is the context we saw of it in the first movie, but also avatar in the sense of, again, like a messiah figure, like the embodiment or the emissary or the avatar of a deity. She uses her status as Awa's messiah to essentially, I think, we're supposed to conclude, force Awa's hand, because Awa doesn't appear to have wanted Spider to be given this gift. She doesn't want him given the gift of being the first human who's biomechanically engineered or biogenetically engineered to be the first human who can coexist with Pandora. Which is interesting on two levels, because for most of the movie, despite the fact that Kiri is still, like, essentially the living, or like the bipedal sapient embodiment of Awa, she loses her connection to Awa in a way that I can only compare to, like, Samson losing his strength after Delilah cuts his hair, something along those lines. Um, and so she spends the entire movie desperately trying to get Awa to pick up the metaphorical phone, which also kind of reminded me of the exchange in Raiders of the Lost Ark, where the Nazis essentially say they want the Ark because it's a hotline or a telephone to God, and then I can't remember the exact context, but someone remarks, "What on earth makes you think God wants to talk to you?" It does give me those vibes. All of this is very interesting, and then of course on the other end of this Deus Ex Machina, which this one is a fair Deus Ex Machina because again she's shamanic Jean Grey Messiah Smurf, and she is essentially kind of using her status as a divine avatar or the warlock of Awa, to put it in D&D type terms, um, to force her deity's hand, more or less, which of course then gets her in trouble with her deity, as we just went over. Um, but then of course you got Spider, who is given this gift of being the first human blessed with the ability to function on Pandora without technological breathing apparatuses. And you've got the fact that he, to some degree, knows that shamanic Jean Grey Messiah Smurf forced Awa's hand in doing so. And of course, and of course, you've got, and of course, all the while this is going on, you've got the counterweight to this, which is Varang, the high priestess of, or I guess the former high priestess, the now, like, dictatorial activist of the Ash people, going, Awa is a horrifying villain and serving her as a trap and makes you little better than animals. So you'd think there would be some very interesting mechanics going on there, especially because this movie does, by way of Kiri, by way of expanding on what was set up in Way of Water, finally get into the like spiritual, trippy, visually interesting aspect of the premise. Um, Unfortunately, and this is where the penny drops, every time one or more of these threads that are vaguely interesting gets brought up, the movie does something completely different, and then you remind yourself, oh wait, I'm watching James Cameron's Avatar movies. Fuck. Because here's the thing. Despite those like 3 or 4 threads that are worth pursuing and that do establish vaguely interesting ideas, one, those ideas essentially go nowhere. Two, when they do vaguely hint at going somewhere, it's visually uninteresting and derivative. Because okay, there are moments where we see Kiri and Korich, because Korich is essentially okay. I will come back to Korich, but there are scenes in this movie where we essentially see what Awa's like mental netherworld is like, which also kind of doubles as the afterlife of the Na'vi. But you've seen it before, and you've seen it before 1,000 times. Basically, take the like ancestral plane from Black Panther, from either of the Black Panther movies, and throw it in a blender with the end of Matrix 3 when Neo is talking with the swarm of squid robots that have formed a unified face. Put those two things in a blender, and that is basically what the Navi afterlife amounts to. There is no like ayahuascan greater symbols. There's no this movie is less trippy and less like metaphysically or spiritually interesting than the first Doctor Strange movie, which as a Doctor Strange fan, I found incredibly basic and derivative in and of itself. But yeah, that's one aspect of it. The aspect of as per usual, having spent 5 minutes doing something vaguely like world building or vaguely like setup work for something vaguely interesting, the movie buggers off and does something entirely derivative that basically sucks all the fun out of it. But then you remember, one, these characters are all stoic pieces of wood with no personality to speak of. Um, the movie in question that you are watching has very little in the way of story to speak of. The plot, such as it is a series of cul-de-sacs and vignettes. There is no narrative focus whatsoever. And then, of course, you've got the elephant in the room, which is, even excluding all of this, all of it is in service to a combination of Noel Savage bullshit that was getting old when Pocahontas did it almost 30 years ago, heavy-handed environmentalism that was getting redundant to the point of fringe when Captain Planet did it almost 30 years ago, and a bunch of like white savior chosen one bullshit that got old when Dances with Wolves and shit were doing it years ago. So let me expand on some of these, and I'm sure I probably will end up repeating myself at least a little bit, but I will expand further on these. Okay, first things first. The redundancies. What passes for a plot in this movie is as I say, a construction of vignettes, cul-de-sacs, and like, okay, how to analogize this in a way that people will remember. Okay, you remember how Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania and the Marvels were a series of like PlayStation 1 era video game fetch quests and sidebars? That is the actual plot of this movie. Not the vaguely interesting ideas or character dynamics set up by Kiri, Varong, Korich, or Spider. Not Loak's search for validation and search for the respect of his people and his father. None of that. None of that. But what is apparently the most central to this plot are a series of rescue missions that even Super Mario would be going, that's a shit, with regards to, and a repetition of various sidebars and vignettes and fetch quests that basically amount to sweet fuck all. Which this is what the movie focuses on anytime it threatens to, again, get my heart beat above, like, the teens. Every time it threatens to do something that makes me think, okay, I can come out of my coma and actually pay attention for 5 minutes. That's what it defaults back to. Oh, we set up an interesting idea with Kiri exploring what it means to be Awa's embodiment, Awa's avatar. Oh, we've set up this interesting question of, given that Awa is essentially a biological organism that controls this planet symbiotically from the core of the planet. Oh, never mind. Oh, Spider might be having some interesting thoughts with regards to the fact that he is now a part of Awa's ecosystem without said goddess's permission because the woman who loved him so much that she was willing to force her own god's hand. Every time any of those things gets set up to be interesting, fetch quest, cul-de-sac, sidebar, rescue mission, yada yada yada, rinse, repeat, etc. Okay, and now in relation to that, I'm going to go into one of the most baffling things about this movie, and that is the simple question of who or what is the narrative focus of this movie? Because the movie tries desperately to make you think that all the characters are somehow the narrative focus. And no, I'm not even exaggerating here. Okay, so to start with, Loak is the one narrating this movie rather than Jake Sully or Natiri. Um, Now, when I first heard that, and maybe this is me once again doing more writing work than the people who wrote this movie actually did, thinking to myself, okay, this movie is all about a Navi tribe that goes AWOL, says fuck the system, fuck nature, and fuck AWOL. We're burning all this shit to the ground because we refuse to be slaves to this parasitic superorganism anymore. Um, so you'd think maybe, or at least I thought, okay, they're having Loak narrate this rather than Sully or Natiri. And Sully and Natiri, for most of this movie, are blindsided by the grief of losing their first son, Nataeum, I think. Um, these characters are not rememberable, which is another basic bitch observation about this franchise that everyone has done. But anyway, so Sully and Nitiri are grieving the loss of Nitaeum, and so they are mostly irrelevant and mostly blindsided by the entire course of this movie. So you would think, given that Loak is narrating this movie, that this movie would be A, his story, or primarily his story, his coming of age, which they set up in the last one and expanded on here, so it would make sense if this was his movie, especially if, given the destructive nature of the Ash people, Sully and Nitiri die through the course of this movie, resulting in the kids, Spider, Kiri, Loak, and the baby one that presumably can't do much because she is a baby and therefore would have to be watched and taken care of by the other three. But you would think this would be setting up, okay, this is Loak's coming of age story where Jake and Atiri die to the Ash people and or Korich, and then the kids have to step up and learn what it means to be an adult. And then you could raise like the question of agency, given the whole, is everything on Pandora just glorified puppets to Awa, or do these characters have some sort of agency with regards to their quasi goddess? And then we could go from there. But no. Despite the fact that Loak is narrating the movie, he spends most of the movie doing what is probably most rightly called the movie's C-plot, which I will describe for you now, and no, I am not even remotely exaggerating, I'm just being pithy about it. Imagine a Wakandan courtroom drama starring anthropomorphic or semi-anthropomorphic super intelligent whales a la the dolphins from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, minus the fun and minus the singing. I am not remotely kidding you. We have a tribal council of whales for which Loak is essentially the main witness and lawyer for his whale bro that was established in the first movie. Or no, the second movie, the first one that had Loak in it. And nothing that is done with regards to the Wakandan courtroom shamanic drama starring super intelligent anthropomorphic whales has any bearing on the plot whatsoever. So despite the fact that Loak is the one narrating the fucker, he plays next to no actual role in anything resembling the movie's story or plot. Then you have Kiri, who is, again, the shamanic Jean Grey Messiah Smurf and the avatar of Awa on Pandora, and the one with the most agency to determine how Awa's powers are used. So you would think, okay, maybe she is the main character, especially considering that her action to force Awa's hand plays both into the Ash people's alternative understanding of Awa as this quasi-parasitic symbiotic being who's basically using everything on Pandora as meat puppets, and also could be explored and doubled down on by an exchange between um, Varong and Kiri, and that would be very interesting because now the actual living avatar of Awa would know for a fact that there are things that most people would consider good that Awa explicitly does not want and explicitly gets her metaphorical panties in a bunch about. So is Kiri the main character, especially because we're allegedly finally getting into some of the quasi-spiritual sci-fi woo that would actually make this movie somewhat interesting and might actually pay off some of that, oh, it's so visually interesting bullshit point. But no, Kiri too is all but sidelined, and her exploration of Awa, or her exploration of her connection with Awa, amounts to sweet fuck all until the very, very end when she acts as a living Deus Ex Machina, which that Deus Ex Machina is much less explicable because, again, Awa gets mad at Kiri and decides not to pick up the phone for like 90% of the movie, and then Kiri spends the movie whining and atoning for doing something that Awa didn't want her to do apparently, and then has to atone for having done this by basically going through her like wandering in the desert period if we're making the other JC references here. Because of course the first and foremost JC that pertains to this franchise is James Cameron, but you know what I'm saying. But that never goes anywhere meaningful, except that Awa finally relents in the very end of the very most dire point of the third act, and this only amounts to Awa doing what she's done for 3 movies now, which is coming in clutch for the Na'vi and company to push aside the invaders and the enemies and blah 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 blah. Okay, so there's that. Then you have this movie being called Fire and Ash, so you would think that at least a main new element, a main new dynamic for this movie would be going as deep into fiery aesthetics and fiery themes and fiery worldviews as the previous one did with water, and then juxtaposing the Ash people with the Metcaina, the water smurfs, and playing fire versus water dynamic. Water is about healing and change and soothing and shit of that nature, and fire is, and I'm explicitly going to phrase this how James Cameron phrased it because he said this in an interview. Fire is symbolic, according to him, of rage and rage and spite and bitterness and depression and vindictiveness. And ash is symbolic of grief, loss, destruction, and depression/oppression. Okay, fine. So you would think that this movie would go into fire and ash in the same way that the previous movie went into the way of water, hence the titles. But no, we spend 20 minutes, maybe a half an hour if we're stretching it, establishing anything about the Ash people beyond that they are bitter and like anti-theistic because Awa abandoned them and so fuck her. And then okay, I'm trying to think of any other irons in the fire that could, in theory, have been the main plot. Oh yes, okay. So then, okay, in relation to Kiri's arc, you have Spider being the first human who is given the powers, who is given Awa's divine intervention, albeit not by Awa's personal choice, to breathe and work and live on Pandora. And you also have Spider feeling conflicted again, like he was in the last one, about who his family is, what family does he belong to, where does he fit into things. And you would think that being given this, again, explicable Deus Ex Machina. I want to draw the line between explicable and non-explicable Deus Ex Machina. The gift of Spider to have the same connection to Awa that all the other Na'vi have the potential to have is a perfectly explicable Deus Ex Machina, because Awa, being the super intelligent organism posing as a goddess, is entirely it is established, it is entirely explicable, it is entirely within the mechanics of the world to function that way. The Awa coming in clutch because the plot requires her to is not explicable and is the cheapest of cheap shots. But anyway, you would think that, okay, so is Spider the main character of this movie? Is his bridge between the humans and the Na'vi aspect going to come into play, either for himself and the wider forces at play, or as his relationship with Kiri, because Spider and Kiri essentially want to be a couple. And you would think any of this would maybe have relevance. But alas, no. Spider's main purpose is not to explore where he fits in the grand design, not to feel conflicted about where his family belongs or where he sits or any of that shit. No. What Spider's job is to be a living MacGuffin that the evil colonialist humans, because yes, we're doing that again, want to dissect and reverse engineer so that they can give normal humans the ability to do what Spider can do now, which is breathe on Pandora and function in connection with Awa. Now, mind you, and again, I apologize if you don't remember this, because this franchise is simply not memorable, so to speak, but it was established that every time the scientist of Earth, or at least the scientist working for the evil bullshit corporation, try to reverse engineer anything that is Pandoran, like biologically or genetically or biomechanically or whatever the fuck, they fail to unless Awa lets it happen. Because people don't remember this, but when Jake was first jacking in, Awa explicitly reached out to him and basically gave him permission to become a Na'vi and part of the system. So we know for a fact that the humans are incapable of reverse engineering Awa's bioengineering unless she wants them to. So this whole rigmarole of we have to save Spider, we have to rescue Spider, is completely pointless, because we know for a fact that they cannot reverse engineer any of Pandora's more complex biology, because if they were able to do that, they would have been able to synthesize or farm out the I want to say Talocans, but that's not it. That's Namor's people from Black Panther 2. The space whales. For simplicity's sake, we're going to go with space whales. They can't actually reverse engineer or synthesize or farm the brain goo of the space whales, and that's why we get the evil whaling allegory, even though pretty much since the 80s, every forestry or agricultural phenomena we've done since the 80s has had the element of restorative rebalancing to it. When you do a lot of forestry, you're supposed to, at least in theory, plant back a bunch of the trees you knock down so that this can be, sustainable agriculture and shit. Same thing with farming and fishing and like anyone who's seen Deadliest Catch knows this, and so on and so on and so forth. Like, this has been a thing in common practice of pretty much every industry that interacts with nature in this way since the 80s, but the humans need not to be able to synthesize or farm or in any way regulate or do anything to the whale brain goo so that they have to act like evil stereotypical whalers and just kill them all indiscriminately. Which it only exists because James Cameron needs there to be an evil whaling allegory, and if the humans on Pandora behaved anything like the humans here have done since the 80s, we wouldn't be having the noble savage bullshit crossed with the overbearing environmentalist bullshit. And thus, we basically have it both implicitly and explicitly confirmed that when it comes to the Awa-touched parts of Pandora, the parts of Pandora's physiology that Awa has explicitly had a hand in designing, the humans cannot reverse engineer it, and thus you would think, if you believed in consistency or logic at all, that the humans would also know that they can't just reverse engineer Spider, and that if they kill him, there goes their golden goose. Because those really are the only two options. Either the humans remember, oh wait, we can't reverse engineer anything that this superorganism designs, so we should try again to get closer to the Navi again. Or they would think to themselves, well, yeah, we could dissect Spider and try to figure out how this works, but one, it wouldn't work because, again, they can't reverse engineer anything the superorganism that is Awa biodesigns because it's too complex and too god-touched and blah, 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 fucking blah. But also, if they do dissect him to try and figure out how in the fuck this works, given that they can't do anything to replicate it, and that dissecting Spider would presumably also kill him, and thus kill their golden goose, they wouldn't be so stupid as to basically treat him like Princess Peach in any given Mario game, but worse. But no, the evil humans have to be evil humans so that we can have the noble savage / Captain Planet environmentalism thing again. And so Spider doesn't get to have an existential crisis over what any of this means to him as a character. Neither does Kiri get to expand or expound on anything of what this means to her as a character. But instead, they both are basically just subject to the plot needs a thing to happen, and therefore, we are okay, I'm almost certain this is not intentional, but it is ironic. James Cameron appears to be using the characters in Avatar out of universe in precisely the same way, the quasi-parasitic symbiotic way that Awa is confirmed to be using the Navi and company in universe. And if James Cameron was doing this on purpose, I would actually have to doff my cap to him and note him at least for the parallel. But James Cameron is not doing any of this on purpose. James Cameron is a twat. But anyway, and I guess this is as good as time as any to get to my broader point with regards to the characters again, which is that these characters have no personality to speak of. None. Niet. Nil point. No personalities to speak of. There is no interior life to these characters. There is no, thought process that goes through these characters' heads that they can't literally just expositorily say out loud to the audience just to confirm that some mental process is going on. Because, okay, again, you would think that Kiri, the avatar of Awa, being basically given the cold shoulder by Awa for 80% of the movie only because she saved the life of the man that she loves, would in any way infect her or affect, I guess, it affect her in an interior way. It would make her emotions do a thing. It would make her mind and thoughts do a thing. It would make her perspective on Awa or on Pandora or on anything change or be different or anything. No, 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 no. None of that. And you would think that Spider, being given this gift essentially at gunpoint by the woman he loves, who is the avatar of Awa, and Awa confirmed to being pissy about it afterwards, because Spider also knows that Kiri is having trouble connecting to Awa explicitly because she gave him a gift that Awa didn't want him to have, and you would think this would affect him or affect the alleged like theme of his arc, which is who are my family, where do I fit, where do I parallel, etc. You would think any of that would maybe have anything to do with anything, but it doesn't. Spider exists mostly to just be a MacGuffin and nary a complex thought passes his lips or indeed his mind about any of this, or his relationship to Kiri, or his relationship to Awa, or his relationship to either of his surrogate fathers, or just none. None of that, because there is no interior personality to any of these characters. Okay, and now I guess we can get into the Korich and Spider and Neytiri and Barang of it all. Because it's very obvious, and I guess I should cut James Cameron some slack here, because yes, I do know that originally Avatar 2 and 3 were one movie that was split into two movies. But here's the thing about that. I am like 95% convinced that if Way of Water and Fire and Ash were condensed into a single movie like they were originally planned to be, this would be a infinitely better movie. It still probably wouldn't be a good movie, but it would at least be a complete movie. Because instead of two sequels in a trilogy being like 80% sidebars, redundancies, and nothing burgers, you would have one sequel movie that was only about 40% sidebars, non sequiturs, and nothing burgers. And that would certainly, I would hope, be a better movie. Not to mention, you would still have a slot open in the trilogy to do more actual in-depth stuff if you took the most relevant parts of Way of Water and the most relevant parts of this movie, tied together some of the redundance and callbacks, because this is the other thing. Rather than create more story to fill this third movie with, given that James Cameron has decided that this single movie needed to be two movies, rather than fill this new movie with more stuff, more depth, more exploration of anything at all, James Cameron appears to have done a click and drag, like find and replace of any holes in this movie by copying redundant shit from the previous movie that was already non sequitur sidebars and fetch quest in that second movie. But yeah, not only do I think this movie would have been better if it and its predecessor had been reduced to one movie, it would be child's play levels of easy to fucking do that. All you would need to do is take like 45 minutes to an hour of the previous movie that was mostly filler, because there was like 45 minutes to an hour of the previous movie that was just mostly filler, was just mostly James Cameron going, ooh, look at what my VFX can do. Take out an hour or so of the previous movie and about an hour to an hour 15 minutes of this movie, which is mostly redundancies or stuff that was repeated from the previous movie. Combine elements of both movies that are just repeating each other and condense them into one single iteration of these various phenomena. And then you would have one single 3 hour and 30-minute movie, give or take, that would be not a good movie, because I still maintain that the first Avatar was not a good movie either, but it would at least have been a worthy successor to the first movie. And you can definitely see where this movie is literally, and I stress this, as literally as I can possibly be intending literally here. There's a reason why Way of Water only introduced relevant aspects in its first act. The fact that Kiri is the like Jean Grey style avatar of Awa. The fact that Korich is now revived as an Avi. The fact that the Metkaina, the water tribe, exists. And the father-son bullshit with Spider and Korich. All of that was established in the first act of Way of Water, and it is also the only contribution to the actual story made by Way of Water. Now, cut to this movie, and what you have is basically the second and third acts that Way of Water should have had, but didn't, because we were too busy doing fillers and non sequiturs in Way of Water. So the only relevant parts of Way of Water were the first act. This is basically the second and third act that Way of Water could have very easily had and didn't. Like, to the letter. To the letter, every aspect of this movie is just the second and third acts that were missing from the previous movie. To the point that you can spot where this movie and the previous movie would have been condensed into one movie. For example, in this movie, and this is why I've waited so long to talk about Korich and Varong and their whole rigmarole. In this movie, we get the classic sequel motif, the classic sequel villain motif of the villains as dark reflections or twisted reflections of the heroes. You have Korich taking Sully's place, and you have Varong functioning to some degree as both a surrogate for Neytiri and to some degree a foil for Kiri, even though, as far as I can remember, they do not have any interactions through the course of this movie. You would think that would at the very least have been a layup. Have your nihilistic burn everything to the ground, fuck our goddess because she is a parasite symbiote that treats us all like puppets, and I am literally the immaculately conceived avatar of this superorganism goddess character, especially given the conflicted nature of where Kiri's at the moment with her. I had to force Awa's hand to save my boyfriend's life, and now she won't talk to me because she hates humans so much that she didn't want me to do that. You would think that would be the single easiest layup to do, not to mention probably, frankly, the emotional core of the fucking movie. In a again, not even better movie, but a movie where the material that was in the first act of Way of Water and the material in this movie that basically functions as the second and third act to that first act would have been condensed into a single movie, cutting about an hour out of Way of Water and an hour 15 out of this movie. Thus reducing its overall runtime to one single dose of 3.5 hours instead of two cases of almost three and a half hours apiece. Then we could have had this single hypothetical movie, this single version of Way of Water that could function as a meaningful sequel to the first Avatar and leave open potential for a third movie where actual plot-related stuff and story-related stuff could actually happen rather than simply being introduced. But no, Kiri and Varong never interact. As far as I'm aware, Varong never even finds out that Kiri is essentially shamanic Jean Grey Messiah Smurf. She never finds out that Awa immaculately conceived with Sigourney Weaver's character's avatar from the first movie, a child who is both a child of her and also kind of her. Um, which you would think would be the perfect foil for each other because you've got one character who is literally, I did everything I could for Awa and she spited me. And then you've got another character who is realizing that just because I'm a messiah doesn't mean I get special treatment and now my goddess is mad at me. Why the fuck is there like no scene between Varong and Kiri where this is established, or even Varong finds out about Kiri? Because in a better version of this movie, what would happen here is maybe even Korich could tell Varong that Kiri is like the living avatar of Awa, which would also, small print, give the title of these movies, the Avatar title, some kind of relevance, because I'm pretty sure they've forgotten about the actual like remote control Avatar aspect of the Navi bodies from the first movie, and they don't really put a bow on Kiri being a like Christ-like avatar of Awa in either of these movies either. So not only would this be a better written movie, but it would actually give the title of the movie some relevance. Heaven forfend, or I guess Awa forfend here, or like rip off Ancestor Plane from Black Panther, forfend here. But yeah, no, that never happens. It might happen in the next movie when James Cameron remembers, oh hey, I have actual substance to the story that I forgot to add in the previous one because I was too busy the effects demoing again. Um, it might happen in the first movie, in the fourth movie, or in the fifth movie, but it did not happen here. And given the whole like uh explicitly theistic anti-theism versus literal like shamanic avatarization duality here, um, you would think that that would ever become relevant, but no. Instead, like I say, they're too busy. They're too busy giving Korich his own like tribe of dark Navi or anti Navi or Bizarro Navi to function as his tribe so that he can be the most one-to-one dark foil for Jake possible. And so rather than explore Varong's role as a spited shaman who decided, you know what, my deity is an asshole, I'm going to do everything I can to ruin that deity's design. Um, Despite that and how perfectly it would mesh with Kiri, nothing is made of that. But we get a kind of parallel between Neytiri and Varong because in her grief, Neytiri is doubling down on her hatred of humans, which to some degree includes her own fucking children and husband, but also definitely includes Spider, despite the fact that Spider is now given the sacred connection that Neytiri was previously established to hate humanity for lacking. Like, she didn't hate them just to hate them. She hated them because they weren't part of Awa's design, and she didn't understand how anyone could live without being a part of Awa. So you would think that any of this business with Kiri and Spider would have any relevance to Neytiri for this, but no, she's just, like, her grief and, like, genocidal rage and despisal of the like evil capitalist humanity motif stereotype uh boils up into she is very bitter, she wants to harm humans, and she really doesn't know how to feel about her own children, her mate, or their adoptive son, which, yes, of course, resolves eventually into Neytiri seeing the light, as it were, and realizing that Spider is a part of their family and he should have gotten the gift that Awa gave him, even though she didn't give it to him. Kiri gave it to him, but never mind. You would think any of this would become relevant, but no. Neytiri does have a like downward spiraling like prejudice and hatred arc, but only so that she can be a better parallel for Wrong. Only so that Neytiri can see her worst aspects mirrored in Varong so that she can see the light later. That is all the depth we are given. All of it. Also, there is an air tribe of Nabi that are basically like nomads and who like double down on the flying aspects of Pandora. One would think that a sensible writer and director would have given the air Navi their own fucking movie, especially considering we're already doing the elemental motif. Which, okay, question. Serious question, although something of a stupid question. Did James Cameron always intend for the Avatar franchise to have elemental, like, subtext and subtitles and sub-branding? Because if not, then he ripped off the better Avatar, the one that actually has any relevance to anyone ever. Hi kitty. Sorry, my little one is being cute. Have to show because it's cute. Okay, but in any case, my kitty's adorableness notwithstanding, did James Cameron always intend for his Avatar to have elemental substrata, as with the better, more well-known Avatar, which I know James Cameron conceived of his Avatar first, and that's actually why they had to add the subtitle to the better Avatar, because they wanted to just call it Avatar, but they couldn't because James Cameron had already trademarked the name, and so they added the subtitle in. So not for the first time, I'm sure wondering what a lot of people have wondering, which is, did James Cameron always intend to have elemental substrata to his Avatar franchise? Or is this one of the most massive coincidences in like literary history? Or is James Cameron literally ripping off the better Avatar? The Schadenfreude dosed cynic in me wants it to be the latter. I want James Cameron to have watched the better Avatar and gone, shit, that's a good idea. I'm using that for my sequel trilogy that I've been working on for a decade. But in actuality, it's probably the second one. It's probably the biggest marketing coincidence in the history of Western civilization. But being that as it may, you would think the air nomads, and again, that's why I'm wondering, did James Cameron literally rip off the better Avatar? Because they literally made their air tribe nomadic, which I guess again, given the like elemental qualities associated with air, the free spirited, the thought orientation, the unboundedness, the unattachment thing, doing like a quasi Buddhist nomad thing with an air tribe isn't the most inexplicable thing in the universe. It is a thing that a lot of people would have known and what have you, but like it is a thing that could organically, coincidentally have occurred to two people at once. So maybe it is again just a massive marketing coincidence. But the cynic in me wants to imagine James Cameron watching the better Avatar and going, oh shit, a air tribe that by virtue of being associated with the element of air is detached and therefore quasi-Buddhist. Fucking stealing that. And I say that not just because it is, that story element in common, but also because the aesthetics of the air Navi, insofar as there's an aesthetic difference between any of the Navi tribes, literally look sort of quasi-Buddhist influence like the air nomads from Avatar proper. So yeah, again, either it's the biggest marketing coincidence in history, or James Cameron is post hoc borrowing from proper Avatar. But my speculations there aside. Um, okay, and so now, yes, now we can finally get into Jake and Natiri, and there's a reason I saved them for last, which is they don't really do anything except be the like spokespeople for their respective perspectives. Like Jake is, as usual, the ex-marine in the body of a Na'vi who's teaching the Na'vi military tactics, which of course, yes, is balanced because we do now have our dark anti-Jake and dark anti-Natiri by Korich teaching the Ash people what he knows of military tactics, and they actually do have the upper hand because Awa is not answering Kiri's phone calls, and B because Korich knows military tactics better than Sully does because Sully just used to be a grunt, whereas Korich used to be a commander, until of course Abel relents at the last second and we get the entire ecosystem of Pandora fucking attacking the usurpers again because reasons. Also, um, despite the fact that this movie was mostly sold on the Ash people and Varong, um, and or Korich, um, who could very easily be the main character himself. This is again that thing of everyone in this movie, the movie tries to convince you is the main character, but none of them really are. Korich could very easily have been the point of view character for this movie as well, because it is him who discovers the Ash people. It is him who has a pre-established stake in Spider. It is him who goes through essentially a dark, twisted mirror reflection of Jake's arc in the first movie. Um, all and again, all of that could have been established in a different version of Way of Water that cut out like an hour's worth of filler and actually brought the relevant parts from this movie over as well, and so we could have had one single 3.5 hour movie instead of two utterly useless 3.5 hour movies. But okay, yes, Courage 2 could have been the main character. And okay, some of you may be listening to all this and thinking to yourself, well, gee, if they all could be the main character, then maybe this is meant to be an ensemble cast. Maybe this is meant to be more about the world of Pandora. Maybe Awa is the main character. And okay, that last part of Awa being the main character of either this movie or frankly the entire franchise, I will give you. That very easily could still be the thing. But here's the thing. This is not an ensemble cast movie. This is not a case where every character is well served and therefore any character could hypothetically have been the main character of the movie. That is not this movie. What this movie is, ladies and gentlemen and assorted others, is essentially every character gets their own 45-minute like short film spin-off movie or like a spin-off episode of a hypothetical James Cameron's Avatar TV show. It's like 5 episodes of a James Cameron's Avatar TV show where each character gets an episode to themselves. But at no point is there any melting pot aspect of this where all the various focal elements of all the various characters, where all the characters' arcs intersect and overlap and intermingle so as to create an ensemble cast or a movie or a show that's focused more on the world of Pandora than any one of the single characters. No, instead what we have, again, is 45-minute short films or TV episodes starring each character individually, both with an A plot and a B plot as per a TV show, but all these like 4 or 5 episodes of this hypothetical TV show where each character headlines their own episode are thrown together with no overlap whatsoever. We have Loax buggering off to the space whales to attend a Wakandan courtroom drama. We have Kiri being a conflicted messiah because she's pissed off her goddess and her goddess won't answer her. We have Spider and being the first human to be given the powers or the divine blessings of Pandora, and tying this to his like girlfriend's motif. Um, we have Korich going through Jake's arc in the first movie and finding his own dark Natiri in the form of Varong. We have Varong's thing of our goddess abandoned us, so fuck her. She makes us all puppets, and so I'm going to cut the strings, etc. And we have Jake and Natiri's thing of we lost our firstborn son, and we're miserable and sad, and it's causing Natiri specifically to spiral and to give in to her hatred, which will then like juxtapose with Varong. But none of this is connected. None of this is interconnected. None of this is interwoven. None of this is like tied together or allowed to inform each other. They're just bubble plots. We've got one bubble, we've got another bubble, we've got another bubble, and all these bubbles are like stacked on each other. They're buttressed against each other, but at no point does anything from one bubble cross over into another bubble. And where there should be connective tissue, where there should be substance to this recipe, we have, again, the redundant sidebars, vignettes, cul-de-sacs, dummy plots, and fetch quests that, again, reminded me heavily of the plot structure from the Marvels, or reminded me heavily of the plot structure from Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, where everything is a video game fetch quest from like the PlayStation 1 era. And again, so you've got the story that goes completely nowhere. You've got the focal points of the stories where the movie is trying to convince you that everyone is the main character, but not letting any one of them be the main character, nor letting their various main character syndromes coalesce into an ensemble piece. And then you've got the underlying heavy-handed themes of it, which themes piss me off on most days anyway. But you've got the backdrop of all the Avatar movies, which is Captain Planet environmentalism, Pocahontas noble savage bullshit, a little bit of sci-fi, like not even the interesting aspects of the Matrix, the real world Zion parts of the Matrix, and the evil corporate stooge bullshit from the worst parts of Aliens and The Abyss. That is all that this movie amounts to. And I'm realizing that I just went in a circle, much like the movie. So before I leave you, we will address the elephant in the room, the Pandoran elephant in the room, which is, of course, but my visuals, derp. And here's the thing. I am the least likely to be sold on Avatar's visuals. And not because I have anything against visuals, or because I think visuals are overrated or unnecessary, or any of that. I am unimpressed by Avatar's visuals because I actually watch weird fucking movies. And this is the most important thing, I have seen movies with 1% of any of the Avatar movies' budgets, with more visually interesting and creative or conceptualized uses of visuals. Because that's the thing. when people talk about the good visuals of this movie, they are talking about how well rendered and realized it is. But being well rendered and realized is not what makes visuals good or interesting to look at. This is why I made the James Cameron took all the art supplies at his disposal and chose to take a blank canvas and do nothing more interesting with it than a fully realistic bowl of fruit. And this is going to be like a sub review within this review, which is a premise that I have had in my head for a very, very long time. And that is, fundamentally here, photorealistic naturalism nerfs the shit out of the Avatar franchise. And by that, I mean James Cameron's Avatar franchise. The other Avatar franchise actually does do something interesting or conceptual or spiritual or metaphysical every now and again, and thus is exempt from this type of scorn. But James Cameron's Avatar franchise is utterly nerfed by photorealistic naturalism because he doesn't appear to understand what CGI is for. CGI, in my and a lot of people's opinion, is not for creating a one-to-one analog to reality. It is for actualizing, of bringing down into the like strata of reality things that are otherwise too abstract, too colorful, too grandiose, too conceptual to do with practical effects or camera tricks or anything of those natures. That is primarily what CGI is for. It is for taking things from concept that could not be actualized in any other way and bringing them as close to reality as we can. And on that note, James Cameron does nothing but create dance. Like, I've avoided pulling the Dances with Wolves or Pocahontas card as much as I can in this review. But this is the fundamental issue. Despite how well rendered everything is, despite how James Cameron uniquely let the visual effects artist finish rendering the things he told them to render, unlike a lot of what Marvel does and unlike what a lot of other blockbusters do, this movie is extremely well rendered. But all he does with it is create a rainforest and a quasi-Native American tribe that happen to be blue instead of brown or various shades of brown. And that is a complete and utter waste of visuals. This is what I mean when I say I am not impressed by Avatar's visuals. Yes, it is all very well rendered, but it means nothing. Exactly nothing. It is just a Native American, like, Cowboys versus Indians movie in space with with a tiny fraction of sci-fi element to it and no greater depth whatsoever. There are no interesting concepts in this movie. Even when it does vaguely look like, okay, we're finally going to figure out how this Awa thing works. We're finally going to figure out how the spirituality of Pandora works. We're finally going to figure out what this like symbiotic nature of all Pandora coexisting and being an extension of the superorganism called Awa. Even when it's doing that, like I said before, all it does is like the most generic aspects of Black Panther's ancestral plane mixed with a little bit of the like squid swarm from the third Matrix movie that forms a face. That's all it does. And I'm sorry, but no. You don't get a cookie just for showing up, James. You don't get a cookie because look, I was able to create the most photorealistic bowl of fruit with these elaborate paints I possibly could. Okay, James, and I'm gonna borrow from my own review of Way of Water here, but Salvador Dali is over there doing the thing with the mouth and clocks. God only knows what William Blake is doing, literally, and we don't even need to talk about the esoteric awesomeness that is Rosalie Norton. Like that's the thing. To what end is any of this being put, James? Why are you choosing to create what amounts to a photorealistic bowl of fruit, or in this case, a photorealistic rendering of the same like cowboy and Indian thing that, yes, Dances with Wolves was doing years ago, um, and don't even give me, but they're blue and so it's different. No, because here's the thing: there are tribal civilizations on this fucking planet, like the Picts, like the Scots, like the Celts, that very often used blue face paint. So even that aspect can go fuck itself, James. Fuck you. Um, because here's the thing: these movies are made with hundreds of millions of dollars. I think this one has a budget of $400 million or something in that general ballpark. The problem being is I, like many people, grew up watching a lot of documentaries and a lot of nature documentaries, especially Animal Planet, the History Channel, the Science Channel, National Geographic. I have seen a bunch of these. And they are all made for chump change by Hollywood standards. I would be very surprised if they were more than like single digit million productions each. And so, given how much James Cameron loves nature documentaries, why in the fuck, and he's so insistent on making these movies like an hour's worth of glorified nature documentary every movie. So instead of taking all this high-tech sci-fi bullshit, James, all this Hollywood wizardry, and using it to do nothing but create a one-to-one nature documentary, basically, with a little bit of Jurassic Park thrown into the mix for flavor. Which, by the way, that too has been done in documentaries since at least the late 90s and early 2000s. I remember watching like T-Rex documentaries and like Stegosaurus um dinosaur related documentaries where they used CGI a la Jurassic Park to render fucking dinosaurs that looked fairly photorealistic for the time. And given that we've been able to do that on a TV budget, on an educational TV budget no less, for at least 30 years now, James, I'm sorry, but you don't get a cookie for, but I threw dinosaurs and dinosaur adjacent things into my sci-fi-ified version of Cowboys and Indians where the Indians are painted blue just like the ancient Scots and Picts were. Yeah, no, James, no, fuck you. That's still hackneyed and unoriginal. And again, w- given that you could, given that a CGI canvas is basically a blank slate, given that you could draw, to use my analogy, anything on that blank canvas you wanted, why in all the fucks are you using it to paint a photorealistic bowl of fruit? Why in the fuck are you sticking furry Native Americans with pick coloring into what is essentially a glorified nature documentary with a little bit of sci-fi and a little bit of Jurassic Park thrown in? That's not enough, James. Especially because, and I made this point on Twitter days ago, but there are so many movies that are more visually interesting, which is more important than being visually well rendered, more visually and conceptually interesting than James Cameron's Avatar franchise. Um, Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets, Alita Battle Angel, the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, uh, the Matrix trilogy, which was almost 20 fucking years ago. Um, I'm not gonna give Christopher Nolan credit on that because I actually do slightly like James Cameron's aesthetic of what I guess we could call bioluminescence punk. In the same way that steampunk is about steam power and shit, and cyberpunk is sci-fi cyber bullshit. Um, the aesthetics of the Avatar franchise, for the sake of giving James Cameron the benefit of the doubt, I'm going to call bioluminescence punk. I do prefer James Cameron's bioluminescence punk to Christopher Nolan's everything is brown and gray and devoid of any color or any intrigue or anything of that nature. Just like I do admit to slightly preferring the aesthetic of James Cameron's Avatar franchise over Denis Villeneuve's Dune, because Denis Villeneuve just desperately wants to be Christopher Nolan and forgot, much as James Cameron forgot in Avatar. And now I will hold off on that point for a minute. But yeah, I do slightly prefer James Cameron's bioluminescence punk to um to Christopher Nolan's aesthetic in stuff like Inception or not In Time. In Time was the Justin Timberlake one. Tenet. Um, I do prefer James Cameron's like vaguely like barely flavored bioluminescence punk to Denis Villeneuve's Dune or Christopher Nolan's Inception or Tenet. But only just barely, because even then, I'm left with the thing of these characters are stiff, soulless husks who have no personality or interior life or thought process in them. These environments are soulless husks that are basically just photorealism with some Jurassic Park and some like Matrix sequels thrown in. And again, not the visually or conceptually interesting bullet time or reality bending parts of the Matrix, but the post-apocalyptic cyberpunk aspects of the Matrix, mixed with a little bit of the corporate greed from aliens. But yeah, there are so many movies that do visually interesting, which is more important than visually well rendered, better than James Cameron. And you might be saying, well, Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets still had a fuck you budget. Well, the Pirates movies still had a fuck you budget. Well, the Matrix movies still had a fuck you budget. Yeah, but here's the thing. I was pulling my punches because I wanted to set up precisely that response from y'all. Um, because there are movies that are made with not even 1% of James Cameron's Avatar budgets that do visually interesting better than Avatar. John Dies at the End was made for I think maybe 10 million, and Fire and Ash had a $400 million budget, so that is less than 1% of the budget of James Cameron's Avatar, and John Dies at the End is still a visually and conceptually interesting, and I want to throw in conceptually interesting there, because that's another aspect of visuals. That's another aspect of being visually interesting that is important here. Not only is it a basic concept portrayed in a visually interesting way, but it's a conceptually interesting concept portrayed in a visually interesting way in the case of like John Dies at the End. Another great example is The Last Mimsy, which I think was actually made for the like single digit millions. But everything like weird or trippy or metaphysical or strange in The Last Mimsy, a movie that was made for the single digit millions and I think wasn't even in the theaters for a full theatrical run. I think there was some theaters to it, but I'm pretty sure it went to DVD very, very quickly. Um, every time The Last Mimsy tries to get like trippy or weird or metaphysical, every aspect of it is more interesting visually and conceptually than anything going on here. Um, and there are also like mid-tier versions of this where it's not as big as the like Matrixes and Pirates 3s and Valerians, but it's slightly more, but it's significantly more expensive than a John Dies at the End or Last Mimsy, like Donnie Darko, like Train Spotting, like Naked Lunch. Naked Lunch is a great fucking example. All of these movies, all of these movies are visually and conceptually more interesting and well realized, not just well rendered, but well realized than the entirety of James Cameron's Avatar franchise. And yet, James Cameron's fucking Avatar franchise makes two bastarding $1 billion a piece minimum, and a great, actually, like, one-to-one parallel here is Alita Battle Angel, which James Cameron was actually involved in, mind you, was I think 450 million at the box office, which is literally almost the budget of this movie, and literally only about $100 million above this movie's presumed opening weekend as of the time of recording. What sense does that make? And that's not even going into the movies that are more visually interesting, but not quite as well realized because they were made with even less money than a Last Mimsy or a John Dies at the End. Off the top of my head, I'm thinking of, like, as much as this movie is shit in so many other ways, if anyone remembers The Son of the Mask, when the movie got rid of Jamie Kennedy's character and his girlfriend, which were completely useless, and focused in on the dog with the mask, the baby with the powers of the mask, and uh, Alan Cummings as Loki. And yes, I do think he's a better Loki than Tom Hiddleston. Don't at me. Um, when it focuses in on those elements and goes full like live action cartoon, it is more visually interesting and more conceptually interesting than anything going on here. Um, Monkey Bone is another great one. Most of Tim Burton's filmography, infinitely more visually, stylistically, and conceptually more interesting than anything James Cameron has ever done, frankly. But these movies are the ones that make two bastarding buggering billion apiece. And back on point with Alita Battle Angel. James Cameron was involved in Alita Battle Angel, and it has like a visual quality on par with the Avatar franchise, but it has much more life, much more fandom, and is much more well realized. Not because of James Cameron, or at least not according to my theory. My theory, and I will come back to this in a second, is that Robert Rodriguez, not James Cameron, was the secret sauce for Alita Battle Angel, and I'll tell you why. Because Robert Rodriguez has always been good at realizing visually and conceptually interesting ideas, like almost to a Jack Kirby level aesthetic and degree, like Spy Kids 3D Game Over or Shark Boy and Lava Girl, but he's managed to do it on literally the pocket change that he and his friends could get together when none of them is doing anything else. And Alita Battle Angel is a perfect example of when you give Robert Rodriguez the kind of money that Disney has given to James Cameron twice now, and that whoever the fuck owned the first Avatar did the first time, and he managed to inject something that is desperately lacking in this franchise, which is heart, soul, and a interesting style that is worth talking about. It's not just, oh, I'm gonna blow 400 bastarding billion dollars and basically create a one-to-one glorified nature documentary with some dinosaurs thrown in, even though other nature documentaries have been able to do that for 2 decades now. Like, even aside from all the like um Animal Planet Dino documentaries and stuff, there's even been like mockumentaries, like in particular there's one I can think of called Dragons: A Fantasy Made Real that Animal Planet did, which was literally let's treat dragons as though they're real. And then there was that other one, that other like trying to do almost like an evolutionary thing with the Fiji mermaid with P.T. Barnum's Fiji mermaid, as though those were real creatures. Um uh Mermaids the Dark Truth, or whatever the fuck it was called. Both of those are mockumentaries, once again creating entirely fictional, like naturalistic phenomena here. Um but they did that on maybe half of a percentage point of what James Cameron has blown on these Avatar movies that are utterly nerfed by no stylization, no conceptualization, no like grandiose vision, nothing, just one-to-one naturalism again and again and again and again, which again, if you took the like $400 billion you blew on Fire and Ash, James Cameron, you could make thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of those style of nature documentaries. The nature documentaries, the like alien nature documentaries, the dragon like mockumentary nature documentaries, the mermaid one, and so on. If you just want to beat people over the head with environmentalism by showing them how beautiful nature is, James Cameron, why don't yeah, and you have Disney on the line. So why don't you call up to Disney Nature, um the substrata of Disney that does explicitly do nature documentaries, and tell them, I want to be your director of cinematography for every nature documentary you do from now on. That would make Disney so transcendently happy, and it would probably make a bunch of the fans of actual nature documentaries insanely happy. And if you wanted to throw in a mockumentary every now and then, like Dragon the Fantasy Made Real, or like the Mermaid Conspiracy one, everyone would be perfectly fine with that. But you could do it with a tenth of what you spend on this bullshit, and it would actually let you show how to, and this is going to be a recurring word here, stylize actual photography. Because here's the thing. This is the other thing. I am the king of wondering, where in all the fucks has Hollywood capacity for style gone? But this goes back to my wider point of how much photorealistic naturalism utterly nerfs not only James Cameron's Avatar franchise, but like 90% of all the Disney live action remakes, because for some reason, doing a quasi live action remake says to Disney, remove all the color and stylization, which there is no cause to be doing. You can do and should do stylization in CGI, in like quasi photorealistic CGI. Another great example, Oz the Great and Powerful, was also highly stylized and very visually stunning and blah 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 blah. But because of its stylization and its realization of conceptualization, is a far more visually interesting movie than this shit. I've already made the point about how Son of the Mask, of all things, when it gets rid of its human characters and focuses on the like reality warping, Toon Force, magic cartoon stuff, is more visually interesting than anything James Cameron has ever done with this franchise. But another great example is, and I'm maybe the one person willing to give this movie like half or third credit for anything, but in the third act of the Michael Myers Cat in the Hat movie, when they leave the Thing 1 and Thing 2 crate open, and the home dimension of Thing 1 and Thing 2, because yes, in that movie there's a like pocket dimension inside the crate and whatever. But when they leave that crate open and its interdimensional magic leaks out, it also creates something more visually and conceptually interesting than this series of movies. So when even a terrible fucking movie like Michael Myers' The Cat in the Hat or like The Son of the Mask can eat this movie's lunch with a tenth of the budget or not even a tenth of the budget of this franchise or this singular movie. And meanwhile, all James Cameron can do is look how many photorealistic bowls of fruit I can plate. Look how many nature documentary homages I can do with this barely sci-fi franchise, with this barely cowboys and Indians bullshit, with this barely fucking Dances with Wolves, Fern Gully, Pocahontas style plot. And that's the thing. When people say, "Oh, this movie is just Fern Gully," or "This movie is just Pocahontas," or "This movie is just," um, or "This movie is just Dances with Wolves," or what have you, that by itself is not a criticism in the way that a lot of people, I think, mean it to be. The issue of that analogy, the issue of that call out, is not that this movie is in the same genre as any of those. It's not that this movie takes inspiration from any of those. It's not even that this movie has the same themes as any of those. It's that aside from mimicking those, aside from doing the most bare minimum, bare bones version of any of those, this movie has nothing. This movie has no soul. This movie has no characters. This movie has no story. The plots of this movie are, again, the most analogous to something like the Marvels or Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania's worst aspects. Not even the whole thing, just the worst and most derivative and cyclical and non sequitur and vignette parts of their plots, which were insufferably basic and stupid to begin with. Like, that is why people constantly make the Fern Gully or Pocahontas or Dances with Wolves comparison. It's not because it's in the same genre, it's not because it has the same theme, not even that it takes inspiration. It's that when you realize that that is all you're getting, you realize that that is all you're getting. It's all that's there. It's literally all that's there. And again, this movie does occasionally play with something more metaphysical, with something a little bit more abstract, as a movie like this should if it wants to get my visual approval. Because again, my standard for good visuals, my standard for visually interesting and conceptually creative visuals is something like A Naked Lunch, or A John Dies at the End, or The Last Mimsy, or Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets, or the cartoony, Toon Force magic, reality bending parts of Son of the Mask, or the leaving the crate open third act of the Michael Myers Camp. That's what I mean when I say visually interesting. And that's also why I fucking hate the Denis Villeneuve Doom movies, sidebar. Because there again, you have a movie, you have a concept that's supposed to be about a version of like space LSD that actually has the tangible reality bending effects of or on the fabric of reality that real world LSD only seems to have the impact of. Like the kinds of hallucinations that occur with terrestrial LSD actually meaningfully and detectably occur with the spice. Not only that, but Herbert's Dune is also very heavily influenced by his understanding of religion and spirituality and how those things, how religion and spirituality affect like Game of Thrones style politics. Those are the crucial features of Dune. The fact that spice is basically, what if all the hallucinogenic effects of LSD and mescaline and ayahuasca and so on weren't just hallucinations but actually affected reality accordingly? And what if we use that to explore the like religious, spiritual, metaphysical, and philosophical implications of what would a super intelligence born from the spice do to intergalactic Game of Thrones style politics? And Denis Villeneuve contains none of that shit. He basically avoids using the spice's trippy elements or visually interesting elements whenever he fucking can, and it pisses me off to no end. But at least Denis Villeneuve when he gets stuck, when his boredom as an aesthetic shit that he borrowed from Christopher Nolan, which again I hate this whole boredom is equivalent to seriousness, so we have to use boredom as an aesthetic shit that Christopher Nolan pioneered, Denis Villeneuve ripped off, and then Chloe Zhao ripped off from him when she was doing the bizarro version of the Eternals. Um, but at least when Denis Villeneuve is getting lost in the sauce of his own boredom and photorealism as an aesthetic choice with no stylization and no color and no conceptualization, when he gets lost in that boredom sauce, he can at least go back to like the Wikipedia of the Dune franchise and go, "Oh wait, shit, yeah, I am making a Dune movie, so maybe I should throw at least some of the actual plot and characters and shit from Dune in here, while also still for some fucking reason doing boredom as an aesthetic as my aesthetic choice." But James Cameron, because he is trying to do something that is ostensibly an original franchise, doesn't have a Wikipedia to borrow from except his own. That's that's why Way of Water was so derivative of the first movie, and this movie is derivative of both Way of Water and the first movie. Aside from the fact that it was, the second and third acts of the second movie just chopped off and thrown into their own movies for some reason. Um, like that is what we're dealing with. At least Denis Villeneuve, despite his boredom as an aesthetic, photorealism and over stylization or conceptualization bullshit, despite all that, he can at least say, "I'm adapting a Dune movie, so I probably should throw some Dune in here occasionally." Or I'm making a Dune movie, so I should throw some Dune in here occasionally. James Cameron has no pre-established source material to borrow from that he hasn't already borrowed from, and so he decides to be a derivative of himself, which was already nerfed by photorealism, naturalism, and no concept of stylization or conceptualization to speak of. So, yeah, no, photorealism nerfed the James Cameron's Avatar franchise in the same way that boredom as an aesthetic nerfs most of the more interesting concepts that Christopher Nolan likes to play with. Because I will give that to Christopher Nolan. He does like to play with interesting concepts. He has absolutely no fucking clue how to actually stylize or conceptualize them as interesting, but he at least tries to swing for things. And okay, here's another example. Speaking of movies that are very derivative of Dune, because come to think of it, Avatar, James Cameron's version, is in many ways derivative of Dune, just with the super intelligent alien super organism that is Awa in place of the spice. Um, so there's that, or in place of both the spice and the like ancient intergalactic politicking of the Bene Gesserit, if I'm being thorough here. Um, James Cameron's Avatar franchise is very heavily derivative of Dune. Um, but even as far as like Dune ripoffs or quasi Star Wars ripoffs or Matrix ripoffs, I'm gonna say something else. Um, Rebel Moon. Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon is actually more visually interesting and conceptually interesting than the Avatar franchise. Because at least, despite all the crazy ass, what in the fuck is he thinking bullshit that Zack Snyder gets up to, at least he swings for the fucking fences. At least he's willing to do utterly bizarre, seemingly nonsensical shit and just run with it and take it, like, both, like, plot dramatically seriously, but also stylistically seriously. So, yeah, if you're interested in movies that are as visually interesting as James Cameron's Avatar is or more, Rebel Moon we can add to the list, and it was made for at least like half um of what any of the James Cameron's Avatar movies were made for. And in relation to the swinging to the fences thing, and I was going to bring this up before I end things, insofar as people like Robert Rodriguez, Tim Burton, Guillermo del Toro, Sam Raimi, insofar as these people, and even to some extent Zack Snyder, swing for the fences and thus can be excused for a lot because at least they're swinging for the fences, James Cameron does not. He he does not swing for the fences with regards to anything. He is the fence post. And I don't mean he is the fence post in the sense that he is the one who marks out the boundaries that other people then move beyond. I mean he's a fence post, both in the sense that he and his world are wooden as fuck, but also in the sense of like Tim Curry's organ character from Beauty and the Beast, The Enchanted Christmas, or the air conditioner from The Brave Little Toaster, i.e., he is a fence post in the sense that he is bolted to the fucking ground. He does not move. He is stuck in like the late 80s, early 90s mentality, and that is why he can't do anything but reference environmentalism that was passe when Captain Planet did it, and Noble Savage bullshit that was passe when Pocahontas did it. And all of his characters are equally as wooden and lifeless as a fence post. All of his world building is equally as worthless as a fence post. All his allegedly spiritual stuff, which again I give him credit for actually trying to explore in this movie, even though it amounted to sweet fuck all and was frankly just a cock tease. All of that is stuff we've seen done dozens of times better, dozens of other places, and and so yeah, I guess I need to end this off, and I'm gonna end this off differently than I normally would, because normally it would just be a cheers, guys, and I'll see you next time. But for this one time, I'm gonna do a little message to both James Cameron and all the people who simp unnecessarily for this utterly soulless, irrelevant franchise. And I'm gonna do it by speaking to you in your idiom, and I'm gonna do it using something that I know you all will understand. And don't worry, for those that can't tolerate my singing, I will only sing 3 verses of the thing I'm referencing, just for the sake of getting the getting the point across. So this one's for you, James Cameron, and all the fans of James Cameron's Avatar franchise. You think I'm an ignorant savage, and you've been so many places, I guess it must be so. But still I cannot see if the savage one is me. How can there be so much that you don't know? You don't know. You think the only people who are people are the people who look and think like you. But once you walk the footsteps of the stranger, you'll learn things which you never knew, you never knew. You may own the earth and still all you'll own is earth until you can paint with all the colors of the wind. Cheers, guys. Fuck this franchise, and if you want actually visually interesting movies, they're out there. They're made for a fraction of what this bullshit costs, and they do so many more interesting things than this franchise probably ever will. Cheers.